All right, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com, also video presentation. So the subject is gravity and its causes, and my argument is that regular physics has a very poor diagram of the mechanics of gravity, and it's kind of obviously broken as an idea and insufficient and weak. And the logic of some other mechanism being the cause is so much more obvious and evidenced and sensible and all of that. So it starts with, okay, they have a concept called bent space time, where they're saying that somehow space and time are related to each other and somehow they're bent by mass existing in the universe. And there's no mechanical mechanism. There's just some rule that somehow, whenever anything's put in space, that it has a bunch of space essentially converges into that mass and creates a stream of some kind. At least that's how it's taught by Leonard Susskind at Stanford. Somebody who's supposed to be an expert. He basically describes it as, pretend there was this invisible virtual fluid and essentially you're just consuming it, no explanation of any way, anything other than a vacuum cleaner with no exhaling port. It just sucks and it doesn't blow anywhere, something like that. All right, so I've never found the explanation at all satisfactory. It never seemed to me that gravity is anything other than something real pushing stuff into the earth. It never made any sense to think of it as a pulling mechanism. And then one of the giveaways, I'd say a pretty strong giveaway, is the fact that it has the same speed, okay, as the rest of the material stuff in the universe. You can see the arrow now. Just do it somewhere else. All right, if you don't want to cooperate, it's okay. You don't have to play along. There, now you're erased. How do you like that? All right, so this gravity somehow, this bending of space somehow has to moves at this kind of slow speed. I mean, not instantaneous anyway. So somehow this fabric of space, this fabric, it's really a bad example because it's only a two-dimensional example, and this convergence is happening in all three dimensions, so it really is a true convergence. And why would it be at a speed? And why would the speed be essentially the same as the speed of light, indicating it's like all the other forces, that somehow it's got to be understood as some sort of discrete substance that creates motion in objects, that has momentum. So anyway, so this is the first huge giveaway, is that it moves at the same speed as a force. So yeah, there's no reason to think it's not an actual force. And the trick with the Earth is that you can understand that this force, okay, if I was to say the force line was this long or whatever, how much force is going into the Earth. The idea, the simple explanation is that obviously on one side of wherever you want to put a human being, you could argue, or any object that's going to get pushed into the Earth, that the force is free to hit them from the external universe, but the balancing force, the force that would keep you in one place in space, you would know that you're getting hit by cell phone calls and you're getting hit by different stuff. And you kind of know that if you were empty space, though, there would be the same amount of stuff coming from all directions and you basically just stay in one place. And it's only because of the existence of these other objects that you would tend to move towards those objects. And why? Is because, well, the stuff that would be hitting you doesn't hit you. So the simple argument is that when stuff has to go through the Earth, it's going to be retarded in its capacity to get to you, especially in the same moment in time. So you can understand that a force coming from the external universe towards your feet has to go through the entire Earth to get to your feet. And the simple argument is it's just like light is slowed down traveling through glass or some other substance. It's slowed down traveling through the Earth. And it does, in fact, travel through the Earth. It travels through a lot of substances quite easily, frankly. There's some evidence that ultraviolet radiation goes through quite a few layers of your mass in terms of the energy. So it's, and certainly X-rays penetrate us quite easily. So we got to understand that all of this radiation is traveling through the Earth, and it's going to go through the Earth at very different speeds depending on, how much it interacts with the matter. The more it interacts, the slower the motion's going to get somewhere. So you're starting off with a bit of motion, all right, and that motion is transferred to the Earth, and that motion has to travel through these little bits getting to you. Now, the obvious evidence that this is how it does in fact work is that the Earth, so I guess I'll write, let's see, I think it's something like 4r cubed, pretty close to that. It's like 4/3 pi, which was somewhere around 4. Okay, and then your r cubed is your volume change. So as you increase the radius, you're cubing, okay, how much volume of material you're going to have to, that's going to dilute anything you're putting into it. So it's a huge volume difference. So if you go into the center of the Earth, you could say, okay, there's only 6 elements here. And on the surface, there's 60 elements. So it's, a huge difference between how many things any interaction will be transferred. So there's 2 ideas here. There's one idea that, okay, there's all kinds of energy that's going to go straight through the Earth and right through the center of the Earth. Now, some of the energy is going to go this way. Okay, it's going to go in other angles. But a whole bunch of it's going to do this getting magnified thing, essentially. So it's almost like a lens magnifying, and that you're going to take what happens over a surface and you're going to concentrate it into one tiny little location. And that's essentially what the surface of the Earth does. So all of the force hitting the surface of the Earth is diluted by that r cubed factor. And so so it's a huge number of hunks of matter getting hit by the energy from the universe, all of the galaxies and all the stuff that's radiating some sort of radiation. And then the sun, of course. And that energy hits the surface of the Earth, and it has to, I shouldn't bring up the sun just because it's obviously not a relevant gravitational influence. It's not enough energy. So there's obviously a whole bunch of invisible energy that is a lot thicker and stronger than the energy coming from the sun, because the sun doesn't actually push much. Pushes, but it doesn't push much. But anyway, and so you can sort of just understand that the Earth is getting a certain temperature from what it's just collecting on the outside. And then you can just understand layer by layer, it's going into the Earth. And as it goes to each layer, the same amount of heat, okay, that's what we'll call it, that hit the surface is going to go into all those places, but it's all pushing in one direction towards the center, right? So the stuff coming from the bottom is going up, and the stuff from the top is going down. So, I could do these as eccentric circles, but I think it's easier to understand as taking a chunk of it and just understanding that chunk reduces to a focus. And so all the energy that was heating all of that matter, as it gets more and more condensed, you're just basically saying, well, I heated 60 things, and then I heated 40, and then I heated with the same amount of heat 20, and then I moved 10. And so as I keep reducing the amount of mass, I keep increasing the amount of, you could argue, velocity. and but it's really the same amount of heat. It's the same amount of momentum. So the momentum that hits the surface gets concentrated in the center of the Earth, and there's a whole bunch of momentum, and it's, crossing each other essentially. It can't really cancel or do anything like that. It all has to come back out again, and it does. And it's doing the same thing when it comes out. It's basically just the same amount of heat as it was going in, and so you could argue that the total of what hit the bottom and what hit the top at every layer is reduced to a smaller and smaller amount of mass having to absorb all of that motion. And it takes time to do all this, so like I stated. And so you could understand that as energy moves into the Earth, because it is moving slower, it ends up concentrating. And so you end up with a lot more of it inside of the Earth than would be a sphere of empty space. So if I had a sphere of empty space, I guess I'll put it down here. In space, there would only be so much energy that's passing through that at any 1 second. And you'd argue that the Earth has a lot more than that because it's moving slower. So it's all getting trapped inside of the Earth. But the key fact is that you get pushed into the Earth first by gravity. So there's an absence, a lack of energy meeting you. So there's energy hitting you from the external universe now, and the energy that should have hit you from below hasn't gotten to you yet. And so you're in that differential. You push into the Earth. Eventually the Earth is, yes, it does push back, but it pushes back a little too late. So, you're always one push in ahead of the Earth's pushes back. So as the Earth pushes back, you're already pushing in again, because gravity is a constant condition. It isn't per second. That's how we measure it. It's per every unit of time you could create. It's happening in any unit of time. There's a constancy of it. Okay. And there's just this clear time differential. So there's a little bit, gravity has a little bit to do with time, but it's not bending any time dimension. It's just the fact that you're stuck in a time differential between the force hitting you from the free universe and the force getting to you through the Earth to get to you. And that differential means you're going to compress the Earth, and it's real pressure. So the simple argument is if the spent geodesic argument, the spent space theory, is non-mechanical, and it's not a real thing in the universe. It doesn't absorb energy. It doesn't require energy. And clearly it creates energy. So this is the big problem. If you really, if you accept the obvious, that us constantly standing on the Earth is constantly pushing pressure into the Earth, compressing, creating heat, then you understand that's real energy. The heat is real energy, and it really does have to radiate back out of the Earth. The Earth does have to be at equilibrium. So you know that the energy going in and the energy going out is the same over a period of time. It just isn't this exact moment the same. At this exact moment, there's a tiny deficit. But in all of time, it balances out. And the Earth obviously has stored energy. It's collected force out of the universe that would be moving through the universe, and it slowed it down, and by slowing it down, thickened it. Okay, so there's more of it inside the space that is the Earth than would be the space that would be just the same volume of space contains less force in it. All right. And so bent space is clearly creating what would be called energy. It's new energy in the universe if bent space did it. And there's no explanation for how this constant production of energy doesn't create an infinite amount of heat in the universe. So obviously the heat coming out has to, in some way, be cycled into the heat going in. So the heat from one object, one material object, basically heats the other objects in the universe. They're all applying this pressure to each other through the process of just being in this universe. And the fact is as the matter condenses, it absorbs energy from the field, which means there's less pressure condensing it, which means that's why there's an equilibrium. It doesn't get out of control. Is because for every compression, there's a lack of force pushing, simply put. And so the universe is just oscillating in that condition where if it makes too many galaxies, gets matter too close together, then the consequence of that will be less energy in the field and therefore less pressure pushing them together, and they'll expand back out again. But the real key point is that bent space doesn't explain anything. So we know the inverse square law happens. The sun creates an inverse square law in terms of how it radiates photons. So it's the same exact rules, except it's working in the opposite way. The force is coming out instead of going in. But you could diagram it and describe it exactly the same. I could call it a bent geodesic. Photons come out of the light bulb in the form obedient to a bent geodesic. I could say it and it'd be true, because it's exactly the same function, just in reverse. So it's a common theme of spherical symmetry, the inverse square law. And so saying that there's a bent geodesic doesn't say anything more than inverse square law. It doesn't explain anything. And physics already knew there was an inverse square law, so bent space doesn't say anything. It's not a mechanism. And clearly, if it was a mechanism, if it is a mechanism, it's got to be called heat, because that's all it's really about. We create motion into the earth. Anything crashing into the earth, anything sitting on the earth is constantly pushing towards the center of the earth. It's compressing the earth. It's actively adding energy to the earth. And so if gravity is creating objects that are generating energy, then gravity's got to get fueled somehow. And there's zero explanation of any way that gravity or something called bent space could be fueled. So without any mechanism explaining how it is circular, and self-generating, then there's no explanation. It's not telling you anything you didn't already know 400 years ago. It's certainly not telling you anything Galileo didn't already explain, or even Newton. And Newton basically said, look, I can't tell you how it happens, how it does it. But Newton told you. Einstein didn't add even a tiny bit of mechanical insight into how it happens. He just said the bent geodesic is some sort of thing in space, some function that space has. And all he said was, yeah, it's an inverse square law. Well, Newton already said that with his, I don't know. I don't even attempt to explain to you how it happens. And that's because Newton didn't know about electrons and protons and didn't really understand completely that heat is, in fact, momentum or motion. That you generate heat by taking the motion out of something and putting it in little things. So when little things are moving, we call it heat. But it's just little things moving with momentum. It's exactly the same as the big things moving with momentum. It's just that we can't see it, so we call it heat. All right, so it's probably enough to make the point. So bent space as a concept has no real physical evidence, and it certainly can't explain, the obvious. So if you understand that the Earth is at equilibrium, that if the Earth's center was made molten, and there wasn't any mechanism that kept it that way, that is, kept fueling the fire, that it would cool down in 58 days or something. It's probably less than that. If it was in real cold space, it probably would radiate all the energy rather quickly. Because there's no vacuum bottle in here. There's no way to store the heat. It's all material objects moving, connected to each other, and the heat would just spill right out of the Earth. So obviously the Earth is, the surface of the Earth is at equilibrium with the universe, and so the heat has to drivel out by a tiny differential. And, you know, so that's why it takes time to get the heat out of the Earth, is because the Earth isn't really in cold space. Space isn't cold. A hunk of space is full of force flying through it, heading somewhere, and it's hot. Okay, in Kelvin standards, it's real heat, and the Earth is heated by it, and that creates a differential just because of the simple fact that the heat moves slower through matter than it moves through space. Heat moves very fast through space, speed of light, and obviously through a tremendous amount of matter, the heat is going to be substantially delayed. All right. Yeah, that's probably enough, right? So, it didn't occur to me to make this argument, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. As stated, I never thought of the universe as being controlled by something called a bent geodesic. It just wasn't an answer. I never considered it an answer. So I always figured it was some kind of actual force like magnetism or something else. It's some sort of real force. It's not, whatever this bent geodesic crap is. But I didn't give it much thought beyond that because to me this big object's space wasn't very interesting to me. I was more interested in how the little stuff makes stuff happen. And I guess I was already of the understanding that if you want to find the real universe, it's not out there. It's, inside there's a little universe that's the real universe. And that's the place where everything happens first. So that was my focus. But anyway, I never liked bent space as a term. I never liked the idea that people said this was some gigantic leap in our understanding of gravity when there's no mechanical mechanism. And the very fact that it is a heat engine, and it's undeniably a heat engine, it creates energy in the universe. It can't be the right answer. Bent space isn't the answer. The simple fact is that the same energy coming out of the sun as photons in all of those forms of force, okay? I mean, you already know there's a whole bunch of this stuff you can't see. Well, there could be a whole bunch more that you can't see. It's just about frequencies. And what if it doesn't have a frequency at all? Well, then you're really going to be out of luck detecting it. And that's really all that's really taking place, is there's a bunch of discrete force in the universe that moves the speed of light, and it basically shares its momentum with bits of matter, electrons and protons. And through that process, the electrons and protons move, but they move a lot slower than the force moves. And that differential creates all of the possibility for complexification. All right, so I'll take a pause and I'll see if there's anything else I have to say. All right, so I guess I could make other arguments to emphasize the point that I'm looking for a counter argument or some shred of evidence indicating that the actual pressure, that is momentum, movement down, that every material object is placing on the Earth. So every grain of sand, every piece of matter that the Earth is made out of is pushing towards the center by gravity. And yes, it gets less and less and less as you go deeper, but the pressure on the matter gets greater and greater as you go deeper. So you could make the argument that, you can go a mile down in the ocean and you have insanely crushing pressures. Now that's being created by the same idea that there's a big column of water above the little thing you're putting in the bottom of the ocean, and all of that weight is on top of whatever your structure is, and that's an insane amount of weight. It's like having a building on top of you. It's huge. And that's a tiny, it's not even going, it's not 1/1000th of the thickness of the Earth. So you're talking about an almost insignificant little bit of downward motion into the Earth. Just imagine if I could make the ocean 100 times or 1,000 times or 100,000 times deeper. And I'm still only halfway, 100,000 times deeper, and I'm still like only half the thickness of the Earth. A quarter of the radius. So just, the pressures are insane. And all of that, okay, is why the Earth is molten in the inside. And there's no other reasonable explanation. That's why the Earth is melted. It's because it's big enough to create a huge amount of pressure on anything in that center, where all of that pressure is concentrated in the sense of where it all passes through that center. So that it has a common little tiny space, okay, where all those rays go through that little tiny space, like a magnifying glass, magnifying a whole bunch of sunlight over a whole area and focusing it on one spot. Well, the Earth is doing the same thing. It's like a gigantic spherical lens that's focusing pressure. And that's why the center of the Earth is molten, is because it's insanely hot in the center, and that moves radially out and gets cooler and cooler as you increase the amount of mass that has to be heated with that energy. But that little blob of energy is radiating out to space, and by the time it gets to the surface, it looks pretty cold, but it's really not cold. Okay, cold is just us saying we like it hot. We function in a very warm universe. There's a whole pile of universe that thinks that's fine, those temperatures. And so, we would think it would be impossible for something to function if it was 10,000 degrees. But that's just what we think. Okay, so, but we're doing the same thing to the cold things and saying you can't function because you're not hot enough. It's real, all heat is positive. There's no negative temperatures in reality. There's just positive temperatures. But anyway, all of that is being created. The fact is, the Earth is radiating energy created, okay, by stuff being pushed into it. And the only way you can make that make sense is that the stuff pushing stuff into the Earth was itself heat. It's a real force. And so it's a real force that pushes you in, and then that real force creates energy that pushes back out. All right. Probably enough of a video. So I said there'll be 4 videos in this series. Well, I think I'll just make the icons the word, the subject. So we'll deal with photons and charge and 1/2 mv squared, of course, the nonsense kinetic energy formula. And they're just glaring examples of really bad science, really bad physics. And I've spent the last 10 years plus trying to bribe or humiliate or poke or in some way get some competent physicist to make a reasoned counter argument, and they won't do it. Can't pay them to engage in the conversation, can't in any way oblige them to answer critiques regarding the silliness of what they claim to be the truth. I mean, it's just a religion in plain truth. They're just telling you there's all these holy ghosty kind of things that exist, and they drew these conclusions based on just absolutely almost minuscule evidence or reasoning or logic, and it's just all an imagined fable that really doesn't have anything to do with what can be understood to be the hard facts. So, anyone willing, let me know what it takes. Yeah, you would think just out of the to protect the dignity of science, you'd think you'd be able to make an argument for free. But if I have to pay you, I will. So let me know what you cost. And if it's reasonable and you have any kind of something to lose, like some kind of integrity, you know. If you're just some sort of anonymous absolute troll, then I'm not terribly interested in paying you. So you have to be a little more credible than that. But otherwise, yeah, I'm listening. Just explain to me how I'm wrong. Please explain. And show me the evidence that demonstrates that I'm wrong. Show me the logic that explains how the heat got into the earth. You know, show me where you have any evidence of your heat theory being accurate. Explain to me how something applying constant pressure, okay, doesn't make something hot. Show me that somewhere in reality. All right, anyway, till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot. Call that a video and such.